This podcast is brought to you by the Islamic Center and NYU. For more information, visit our website at www.icnyu.org.
Last week, we looked at Surah Al-Ikhlas, and we kind of walked through its verses, some of the hadith on it, its meanings. And what we really focused on last week was looking at just essentially, what does that chapter tell us about God, right? And the two key factors that we were looking at, or attributes, were God being ahad and samad, kind of unique in his oneness and kind of a source of refuge, one that you turn to, right? But to start to engage in conversations and reflections on who is God to us, who's the divine to us, how do we understand it? And one of the other reasons we looked at that chapter was because it's really short, and it's one of the chapters that most people just recite when they're in prayer, because we're trying to just bang out our prayers as fast as we possibly can. And this one is even shorter than that one. So I figured we did one short one. Let's do the other short one, that when we're trying to get through our salah, we're reciting it, but there's such depth of meaning to it. There's so much that goes into it that we can extrapolate, both in contextualizing what its revelation is rooted in, as well as thinking about practically how does it apply to us in the course of our day-to-day existence. Do people know this chapter, Surah Al-Kawthar? Are people familiar with it, recited it, ever memorized it? It's pretty short. I'm going to write out the transliteration also, just so people have it. You can't read the Arabic. It says, Inna a'tayna kal-kawthar fasalli rabbika wanhar inna shani'aka You see how bad my English is. You can see even more so my Arabic would have been terrible in writing it. We're going to go through it word by word to be able to just kind of break it down, what is going on here. So last week we introduced two terminologies. One was asbab an-nuzul, sabab an-nuzul, the reason of a revelation, right? If anybody was here last week, you remember we said that? Yeah, if you were here last week. Yeah, great. And so this concept in the sciences of Quran, they give us an understanding of what was the reason that these verses were revealed. And the other thing that we looked at was a way that the Quranic verses are categorized. They're distinguished as being either Meccan or Medinese. And it's not that the verses were revealed in Mecca or in Medina, but utilizing a key point in the period of revelation that's called the Hijrah, where the people leave from Mecca after they've been boycotted and abused and beaten and even killed, deep persecution, to now establish a community and state in Medina. The Hijrah is the migration. And so that becomes a very key mark in a historical understanding. And from the standpoint of the sciences of Quran, becomes a variable in identifying the type of verses categorically. So something pre the Hijrah is called a Meccan surah or Meccan verse. Something post the Hijrah is called a Medinese verse or surah, right? And the verses that were in Mecca tended to be more about the idea of God's oneness, the day of judgment, ethics, values, things that addressed humanity on a whole, because there was no state established at that time. And these were people that were being persecuted. They were being deeply persecuted and oppressed because they followed Islam as a religion. And then in Medina, you start to see things that are more around legalistic frames, do's and don'ts. And there's also wisdom to this, right? We have narration in our tradition that says the Prophet's wife, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, she says, radiyallahu ta'ala anha, that if the first verses that were revealed were just commands and prohibitions, people were told, do this, don't do that, nobody would be Muslim. But the first verses, they were essentially weaning people towards religion, cultivating love and care within somebody so they could understand conceptually what made religion was based on a theology that you believed in, not just rituals that were empty that you practiced, that were passed on from generation to generation. And you don't even know why you do them, but they become now identity variables and do's and don'ts that are weaponized to be able to create a metric of assessment that no person should really even have access to in the first place, right? Does it make sense? So we're going to look at these two things to start off with. There's different opinions on whether this is a surah that was revealed in Mecca or in Medina. And I want to use this as an exercise to give you some indication just as to what people look at when they're trying to understand some of these things. And there's three scenarios. Either this was revealed in Mecca, this was revealed in Medina, or some people would say it was potentially brought down twice. The Prophet ﷺ had this come to him in a couple of occasions. But where and how they would make distinctions, right? فَصَلِّ لِرَبِّكَ وَانْحَرْ is saying that you, and we'll talk about this in more detail in like 10 minutes, but it's saying that you essentially make salah, you pray your ritual prayer. Wanhar, you do the nahar, which is the ritual sacrifice for Eid al-Adha, right? That we know in the Abrahamic tradition, people have, a camel, a goat, cattle slaughtered. That's in reference to the nahar, right? Those are like legal acts. So when they're in Mecca, they're not praying salah the way that we pray 5 times a day, because people are being persecuted. They're not celebrating Eid the way we celebrate Eid, right? So somebody would look at the verse and say, well, since these terms have to deal with things that are ritualistic, that can't happen in Mecca. That's got to be happening in Medina. So it must be indicative that this is coming from Medina. One of the narrators of the hadith that talks about the reason of revelation is Anas ibn Malik, who as a companion was said to be the khadim of the Prophet ﷺ, a young man who was just in service of the messenger of God. He narrates a hadith that's attached to the asbab al-nuzul of this, the reason of revelation, where there's different instances where different people basically are calling the Prophet abtar as like a condescending derogatory remark. And he has numerous children, the Prophet, but the male children that he has, they all pass away, either die at birth or at a young age. And the word abtar, we'll talk about in a little bit more. This Meccan society is a very patriarchal society. It's a society where your lineage is everything. Your skin color, your race, your gender, it all becomes a mechanism to further stratify society, to hold inequity in high regard by those who have privilege and they're from the majority. They also don't have a concept of an afterlife. So there's no accountability mechanism built in theologically. I can do to you whatever I want to simply because I can get away with it. So if the color of your skin or your gender or the persons you're born to are wrong by societal standards, there's no recourse that you have. You can't do anything about it. So when somebody did not have male children or did not have the ability to have children, they'd call them abtar in a very condescending, mocking, taunting kind of way. And so there's narrations where the Prophet ﷺ's sons die. And you have people who are in a place, a man by the name of Al-As ibn Wa'il, who he is essentially rejoicing at the news of the prophet's son dying. It's disgusting, right? You think about people have adversaries, they have opponents, and they're in spaces where even when somebody you have disdain for loses a loved one, let alone loses a child, and the contextualization of this is that this is the setting in which this chapter is being revealed. The prophet has lost a son. He has lost 3 sons. And he experiences this, and they are calling him abtar, saying to people, there's nothing to worry about. He has no male offspring, so he's cut off. He's abtar. This religion's not going anywhere. The contextualization of it's also important to understand, because if anything that we get from our tradition is that Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is a very human person. He's got emotions. He's got feelings. He cries. When one of his sons, Ibrahim, passes away, a companion by the name of Abdurrahman ibn Auf is with him. And they go with him back and forth to the home of Ibrahim's wet nurse until he takes his last breaths. Tears come from the eyes of the prophet. He's crying. Abdurrahman ibn Auf says, what is this, right? Even you, a messenger of God. And he says to him, oh, Ibn Auf, this is mercy, in reference to his tears. He's sad. His baby just died. And you think about the grief, the anxiety that he's stricken by. And in response to it, Allah sends this chapter. Inna a'tainaka al-Kawthar, giving an indication that he recognizes the sadness that his messenger is going through. And so in Mecca, you have one of the sons of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Qasim, passes away. You have also in Medina, the son of the Prophet passes away. You have indication that the people who were against the prophet, they were calling him these names prior to the hijrah in Mecca and in Medina. And so what we want to be able to pull from it is just a recognition of the context and where and how there is a legitimate perspective that it can be a Meccan surah and it can be a surah that is Madanese. Does that make sense so far? Just so we kind of understand the broader background of it. Yeah. Any thoughts or any questions on that at this point? Okay. So what I want us to do is go through it the way that we went through Surah Al-Ikhlas last week, and to talk about it step by step so that we can start to build a relationship. When you're like reading it in your salah, it's a short surah, which is a blessing from God, right? You don't want to hate on yourself when you're reading short chapters in the Quran, because what if you had to read something that was super long and it's really, really, hard, right? And the Prophet, he made things easy for people. So they would pray, and there was children, the elderly. He would teach those who are to be Imam that be mindful of the people praying behind you, right? Go at a pace that makes sense for them. We went to Palestine right before the pandemic, right? May Allah and the occupation taking place there. And if you've ever been to the Haram in Jerusalem, has anybody ever gone to Palestine before? Yeah, no. So for those of you who have gone, like the guards sometimes will test you to make sure you're Muslim. And there was people in our group who were getting super annoyed that soldiers kept testing them by having them recite Quran. And at the end of every night, we do a debrief with people to say, what was the day like for you? How did it feel to be in these settings? And so one girl who was with us, she said, I hate that they keep making me prove that I'm Muslim to them. And so today when they asked me to recite Quran, I started to recite Surah Al-Baqarah in its entirety, right? Which is like the longest chapter in the Quran. And she said, I just kept going and made this soldier listen to as much of it as he could. But on the other end of it, you got chapters that are this short. They have deep meaning, but beyond us looking at the meaning, don't hate on yourself or hate on anybody else in relation to your faith or your relationship to the divine. There's blessing in the fact that Allah gave you a chapter that's short and easy to memorize. Do you remember, if you were here last week, and we talked about Surah Ikhlas, which is also short and easy to memorize. And it's not easy to memorize because it's short. It's easy to memorize because that's just the nature of the Quran. It's easy to memorize it. You hear it, it's got amazing language. And even if you can't speak Arabic or understand it, you're able to take it in remarkably. And there was hadith that we looked at last week where companions would come to the Prophet and they would say that these other people who lead us in prayer, they just always read Surah Al-Ikhlas again and again and again. These are companions of the Messenger of God who are reading the shorter chapters of the book, right? That means if that's what you read, like reading it with a sense of rejoicement. You're not like proving through some litmus test that, and if anything, we're going to talk about when we look at the second verse, when you get to that place where it's more about showing to people, this is where this chapter is in contrast to that. You don't want to show it off. Does that make sense? So if you haven't memorized this chapter, try to memorize it. It's short. If you read it because it's one of the ones you're more comfortable with or you know, great. That's amazing. So when we start off, the word inna, right? Inna, it doesn't have the alif on it as a default. It's more just an alif and a noon, and it's indicating that this is something emphatic. You get a lot of antiquated language in translation, like verilies and indeeds that none of us really speak about when we are having conversations, but it's saying that whatever is coming after this, like know this. And it's not exaggeration. You want to also recognize the subservience to language that's English as well, right? When we talk about emphasis or hyperbole, we're not talking about something that's unnecessarily verbose. We're talking about something that's an indicated tool stylistically that gives us an opportunity to say what's coming next is important. It's very definitive. It's very much so emphasized. The alif that comes after it now gives us an indication that we have also a construct in English that's like a divine we, right? So adding that is telling us that this is not inna, but inna, and it's saying that Allah is now addressing himself through this divine we, right? A'tayna means to give, but it's not just giving with a sense of that I gave Hannah the marker. Do you know what I mean, right? Hannah gave people a live stream. You know what I'm saying? Because what A'tayna is telling us, it's giving in a way that you want like the recipient to have benefit from it. And there's no compulsion to this giving, because if this is God doing the giving, you can't compel God, right? Hannah works at the Islamic Center. We're colleagues. I'm not going to ever force her to do something, but let's just say for argument's sake, I was a terrible person to work for, right? And she doesn't have choice. She has to do it. And she has to just sit here and be here, right? That's a different type of giving then. It's under coercion. It's under compulsion. Allah is not obligated to give anyone anything. So it's coming from a place already now of affirmation and positivity. Because remember the context, the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, his son died. And not only did his son die, but people are mocking him because his son died. They're tearing into him. The way that you like see people engage in all kinds of gossip, just backbiting, all kinds of vulgarity online. Have you ever heard somebody like tear into you unnecessarily? They say like really mean, harsh things, knowing that it's going to strike a chord. This is the state that the Prophet ﷺ is in. He's grieving, he lost a baby, and he's in a space now where the people who are speaking against him are not even just random people on the street. Some of them are his family members. Some of them are people that he had close relationships with. And Allah is telling him, Inna a'tainaka al-kawthar, that a'taina is a type of giving that's coming with a lot of love. It's coming with a sense of, I'm here for you, I have your back. The kaf that comes at the end of it is one that's unique to understand also, because there's other verses in the Quran that when the Prophet's being addressed, he's being addressed through a particular title that he embodies, right? Rasulullah, Nabi, Abd, so many different ways he's described. As a messenger, as a prophet, as a servant of God. What the kaf is saying is that this is not being given to him in any specific frame of his identity. That you're not getting it because you're a student or a community member or a staff member. You're not getting it because you're a parent or a child. You don't get to sit here for any other reason, but you're getting it because of who you are in your entirety. All of the things that make you you are what's going to make you recipient of what it is that we are giving to you, O Muhammad. And that kaf could have been something framed in a different way. It could have called upon him as a messenger or a prophet or a servant of the divine. But in using the kaf, which indicates like you, he's saying that this is being given to you because of you on a whole, not you limited by any kind of title that you have. It's important to reflect on, because you want to extrapolate meaning also for yourself as we go through this, because the book was sent for you to read as well. And so if it became limited in some capacity, it also then would by default exclude many of us if we weren't able to find ourselves in it. Do you get what I mean? And then Al-Kawthar is essentially like an abundance of good, right? So in Arabic, when you have this root, kathara, it means a lot. You have the word kathir, right? Even if you can't speak Arabic, you've probably heard the word kathir before, right? Akthar, right? If you speak Urdu or Hindi, there's cognates of aksar, right? It means there's a lot, often. It happens many times. Kawthar fits into an Arabic form. The base grammar form of any kind of Arabic form is fa'ala, right? So here you put a wow in the middle, and it's going to make it emphatic more, right? It's talking about an increase in it. Like in Arabic, when you talk about the stars, in plural, you say kawkab, right? It has the same form. The wow is there, and it's kawkab. So think about when you've ever seen the stars, like fill the sky, no obstructions, clear night, all you can see are just these dazzling stars, infinite number all around you. That's like the level of kind of abundance that we're talking about. When we're talking about Kawthar, like the abundance of stars that you can see in a clear, dark sky is like the abundance that we're talking about when we talk about Kawthar. Now, when you have something that's a lot of something, it can be a lot of things that are like bad things and good things, or things that are a mix of bad and good. Kawthar is in reference particularly to only a multitude of things that are good and beneficial. It's not talking about it in the frame of just things, right? We have many chairs. You know what I mean? Like they're nice, you're comfortable sitting on a chair, but also person's got to stack them back up. It's a pain at that point. Do you know what I mean? This isn't talking about things that go in either direction or a lot of something that is negative. It's talking about a lot of just what's good, an abundance of it. So when you put the whole verse together, it's saying, indeed, we gave to you Al-Kawthar, an abundance of things that are good. There's hadith that talk about Kawthar in specific as a river in the afterlife. That one is a fountain that'll be on the day of judgment, through which the Prophet ﷺ will be giving people water to drink. We'll talk about that in a little bit. And it's also a river in paradise that has a lot of different kind of characteristics of just kind of goodness to it. Ibn Abbas, who's a companion of the Prophet, he speaks about Al-Kawthar and talks about it in the frame of it being a multitude of things of abundance of good. And the companions ask him, like, well, what about it being a river? Essentially is what the hadith says. And he says that that's a part of it, but it's not it in its entirety. That it's just all the good things that God has given. And so when you look at the chapters that surround this, like from Surah Al-Duha onwards, or you look at the Quran on a whole, what Allah is reminding the Prophet is there's a lot of things that we've given to you of Al-Kawthar. You're not abtar. You're not broken off. You're not cut off. Like the Quran says, إِنَّكَ لَعَلَى خُلُقٍ عَظِيمٍ, that we've given you a good character, that he's been sent as a mercy to the worlds, that he's got so much that it's talking about in terms of blessings and ni'mah and all of these things. And Allah is saying that we've given you this multitude of good. Don't listen to these foolish people, these people who are purposely trying to make you feel like you're lacking or inadequate, that they're mocking you, they're taunting you. Reflect on the things that have been given to you in terms of blessings, in terms of ni'mah, so that when you move forward, you're moving forward with a sense of empowerment. You're moving forward with a sense of strength, a sense of dignity, a recognition of who it is that you actually are, and not what the worst people amongst you would get you to believe yourself to be. And it's not random people, again, that are saying these things to him, but it's people who are close to him, of clans and tribes that he grew up with, family members who are treating him in this way. And he's struggling with it. He's wrestling with it. And Allah Azza wa Jalla is saying to him, Inna a'tainaka al-kawthar, that we've given to you a lot of things. You're not cut off, you're blessed. You're not somebody who is without, you are somebody who has. See yourself in a positive frame. Don't see yourself in terms of what they're trying to get you to see. Do you get what I'm saying? It's arguably one of the hardest things that most of us wrestle with day to day. If we went through just the people sitting here in this room right now, 20 of us or so, give or take, people online, and we would say, tell us how you see yourself. Tell us what makes you a good person. And you think about your own socialization, the voices that you hear constantly, people who you know should be caring about you, but they don't hesitate in tearing you down. Society putting you in boxes that you're most definitely bigger than. It can get really hard. It can get really heavy. There's no shortage of individuals who have parents that speak terribly to them as children. Allah protect us from ever becoming that. Family members who don't hesitate in pointing out lackings, inadequacies, using harsh language, all kinds of things. I remember the first time I was speaking in a place where a young woman came to me at the end of a talk that I give, in front of people, very much like this. Everyone could hear her. And she said, I have a question in regards to what you were saying. And I said, of course. And she said, are you trying to tell me that it's not okay that my father hits me? And I want you to think about what that person's upbringing must have been like and what it starts to do within. What's going on internally and how they reconcile feelings through dissonance. Because people who hold certain relations that are meant to engage you in a certain way are now not honoring the rights that they have over you, and let alone saying things to you that are demeaning or mocking. They're purposely going out of their way to make you feel like you're the lowest of the low. When the world is super heavy, it's really hard. Your Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, lost his child. And when you are in a place where there's no limits, and the people who look to push you down continue to push even more, and they mock you and they ridicule you. When they say abtar, it means cut off, right? And when they're thinking about this now, physiologically, it's not just about cut off in the sense of lineage, but you think about a man's physical anatomy, and they're calling him abtar, saying that that guy is cut off in that way. Do you get what I mean? And he's the messenger of God. He's not able to retort or refute or go back. There's confusion. Think about how you might have felt helpless, or somebody else around you has gone through it and they feel helpless. They don't know how to navigate it. That's my dad talking to me like this. That's my mother talking to me like this. That's my older brother, my older sister, my aunt, my uncle. That's the person who everybody looks up to. In the contextualization of this chapter, our Prophet is struggling with people who are in this arena with him, and they're pointing out things that can become triggering, that can be really hard reminders of things. And he's already got to deal with this. Khadija radiallahu ta'ala anha passes away. Abu Talib passes away. The historians of the prophetic biography, they call that year in the seerah the year of sadness, the year of depression. You don't want to think your grief or your human emotions are an indication of an absence of faith, because nobody would say that Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was weak in his iman just because he was being human. When Khadija passes away, they say he's not the same as he was before her passing. He was totally different after her passing. One of the instances later on, they're bartering for the freedom of prisoners of war. And one of the captives is the son-in-law of the Prophet. And his daughter comes with a necklace that was owned by Khadija radiallahu ta'ala anha to barter his freedom. The necklace passes from numerous hands until it gets into the hands of the Prophet alayhi salam. And when he recognizes it as his wife's necklace, he starts to cry, because he remembers her. It's in the hadith. The way Allah frames this chapter is also written so beautifully that it doesn't allude back to anything that would be triggering or cause harm for the Prophet in terms of the difficult scenario that he's in. That in other chapters where he's been mocked or ridiculed, they say things to him, you're insane, you're crazy, you're a magician. The verses will sometimes bring up those things. He doesn't say it here. That they're telling you that you are this, well, tell them this. Because you don't want to give people that sense of hurt who have gone through that type of loss. Do you get what I mean? And there's so much that you can extrapolate just from that one verse in terms of how do you talk to people who are going through struggles? How do you talk to people who are experiencing real pain? How do you become empathetic in your listening? How do you ensure that you have in your life somebody who has your back that you can turn to when you need someone to talk to, and somebody who's just empathetic in their listening so that they can listen to understand and not listen to respond. And all of it is coming, Inna a'tainaka al-Kawthar, that you're hurting right now. But just remember, we've given you a lot of things that are of goodness and benefit. These people are saying you're cut off. You have a spiritual lineage that's going to transcend billions of people in the world. Al-Kawthar becomes now directly opposite to Al-Abtar. They're saying you got nothing. We're saying you got everything. That positive frame becomes really important to engage, because confidence is categorically distinct from arrogance in our tradition, right? Your confidence allows for you to recognize everything Allah has given to you, embrace your strengths with gratitude, as well as recognize your areas of improvement, your non-strengths. Arrogance just has us see what's wrong with everybody else, weakness around us. And so before we look at some other insights into just this first verse, I want to take a pause here, and I want you to just turn to the people sitting next to you and just think about some of what you're taking away so far, but in particular, think about what gets in the way sometimes from having us see ourselves the way Allah sees us, to see our potential, to see the world with a growth mindset, to see what we're capable of, to recognize our own beauty, inward and outward, to be a source of luminosity, a source of light. You know what I mean? And to start to think about what are ways that we can individually now tap in, because self-talk is important, but it's hard when I have to talk only to me. So how do I start to build for myself atmospheres and environments that help me to see myself for who I actually am, and not what I perceive myself to be based off of people's worst perspectives of me? Do you get what I'm saying? Does that make sense? What I'm asking you to discuss? So if you can just turn to the people sitting around you for a couple of minutes, and let's talk it out. What are some of the things we're taking away so far? And what are some of the things that might contribute to how we see ourselves, and ways that we can ensure that we're building now more of a positive framework rather than something rooted in something negative? And then let's come back and discuss. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry, my internet. I don't know why it's not connected. Are you connected to NYU? Okay, there we go.
Recording in progress.
Oh, I don't have the chat, the previous chat. Can you just retype or copy paste? Okay, so what are some of the things we're talking about so far? What's coming up for people?
Yeah, I think my mom has something to say.
Would you like to say something?
Okay,
Okay, great.
I was just telling them, although that Arabic is my native language, but I usually heard the tafsir of Al-Kawthar as the river. It's the first time I read it as a derivation from the word kafra. Nobody has ever talked to us about Al-Kawthar as a derivation from kafra, a lot of people. So as I'm listening today, I thought that for the first time when I read it, whenever it's I'm in pain or in sadness or in sorrow, and you read that it's not just that, as before I used to read it as from God to Prophet Muhammad the river, but it's also for anyone of us that despite your sorrow, despite your sadness, despite your pain, we're giving you a lot of blessings. So think about the positive blessings that you have, because it's not only about this moment of sadness or sorrow. So this is just what I say.
Yeah, and amongst like all the amazing things you just said, one of the things that's important to understand grammatically, this is in the past tense in Arabic, right? It's not in the future. Like in Surah Al-Duha, you have وَلَسَوْفَ يُعْتِيكَ رَبُّكَ فَتَرْضَى, right? You will get this thing. This is that it's given to you. So in Arabic, when you have something in the past, it's giving an indication that it's defined, like it's already yours, right? So, if you're in a place where your daughter annoys you and you're like, man, what is wrong with this kid? Then you can say to yourself, you know what? Allah's given me Al-Kawthar. It's already there, right? You know what I mean? But you get to this place where you can start to reflect for yourself and you recognize with positivity, right? What else? What else was people talking about? What did you talk about in your groups? You look like you want to say something.
We talked about, we understood the question to be that how do you create the atmosphere for yourself and surround yourself with people so that it's easier for you to see yourself the way Allah does? That was like our takeaway and went from there. And we talked about that the both of us, we start from gratitude. So no matter how worse things get, for example, for me, I always thank Allah that I have clothes to wear and that I have a comfortable space in my home and that I have food, because sometimes as life gets difficult, it's easy to overlook certain blessings that we don't have to think twice about. So for us, it was gratitude.
Yeah.
I was thinking about that dua, oh Allah, grant me the love of those who love you. I was reading it earlier. You said that. Yeah. So we were just talking about how sometimes people will say like, oh, be grateful for like what you have. It's like I feel like it's more like a reflection that's better when it's coming from you inside of you, because I think there's stages. And sometimes when people are telling you about that, they're not telling you from a perspective where they're trying to say that you're not being grateful, but they've already arrived there. And that realization and I guess like arrival at that point is it's such a good feeling that maybe that person's not ready for it, and it has to come from inside.
Yeah. And look, when somebody talks about gratitude, it doesn't assume that the only other state of being is that you're an ingrate, that you're just one polar extreme or the other opposite extreme, right? And that's what that negative cognitive bias does. It gets you to a place where it's really easy to hate on yourself. When we talk about shaniaka, that's what this word means, haters. That's like what it is, right? They hate on you, And so you don't want to be self-deprecating. Gratitude as a tool is meant to be a vision modifier. It's not meant to pretend like there's not difficulty in the world, but it's a mechanism through which we can now see the difficulty differently, right? The prophet's wife asks him, what's the hardest day in your life? He doesn't say there's no hard days, we don't complain. He said Taif. Taif was the hardest time in his life. It was a hard time. People abused him, pushed him out of the city. He thought they were going to welcome him in. He'll have a new place for his community to thrive. And it's the complete opposite, right? So you go in with one expectation, you come out jarred and shocked. And there's narrations that say that he was persecuted so much that what he's wearing on his feet become hardened to the soles of his feet because of the excessive amount of blood that's coming out of them, right? It was a hard time. Gratitude becomes the means through which he can now see it differently. He can approach the challenge differently. When somebody had written in here about like burdens and what we can bear, right? And you want to think about this in a capacity that, again, it's not like platitudinal. It has to make sense, right? So, la yukallifu Allahu nafsan illa wus'aha, that Allah does not kind of burden somebody. The words that are there are in terms of accountability, first of all, right? And it's saying God doesn't place a burden on you beyond your capacity to bear. So in our theology, there's a paradox that within absolute divine decree, you have human agency. So God might not burden you beyond your ability to bear, doesn't mean that God's creation won't burden you beyond your ability to bear. The systems that are built in contradiction to Allah's plan, what Allah tells you to do in terms of your eating, but society tells you, no, you got to eat like this. What Allah tells you about recognizing your beauty, but society says, look at the billboard that's never going to have somebody of your skin color on it, but that's what beauty is. That's not a burden that's easy to bear, but it's not a God-created system, right? It's a system that's antithetical to God's system. So when you think about what creates burdens that are hard to bear, those are things that are coming from other than Allah. Does that make sense? And you gotta be reasonable in it, because if you take a platitude that's like, I'm supposed to be able to carry all of the garbage in the world without anything. Oh man, I've been in conflict zones. I've been in refugee camps. I've been in the aftermath of natural disaster. This is not a religion that's meant to tell people who right now are living in like real difficulty that this is something that their creator has imposed upon them through terminologies like tests and trials and tribulations. Because you have created vehicles, structures that are rooted now in an absence of ethics and values, and they're doing exactly what they're supposed to do. make you believe that your contentment is attached to buying what they're selling to you, make you believe that you don't have enough to share with others, make you believe that your sense of self-worth is attached to materialistic gain, that you have to have a house, you have to have this, you have to have a car, you have to have these things. It's like, no, your goodness is not rooted in those things. Does that make sense? All of it's coming into this place. Inna a'tainaka al-kawthar. We want to think about this in a couple of other ways, just as we're going through it, that you do have now indication of the fact that Kawthar is also in reference to a fountain, a body of water that will come in otherworldly existence. So in this short chapter, you can extrapolate now theological concepts relevant to other frames of existence, that this world is like a drop in the bucket in terms of everything else that you're going to experience. May Allah make us people of Jannah. So you get reference to a day of judgment, paradise, because there's two spaces that Al-Kawthar is said to exist, in Jannah as well as on the day of judgment. And it's again one of the bounties that are given to the Prophet. He is given the ability to intercede. This is a day of judgment that we're told everybody's going to say, nafsi, nafsi, myself, myself. One voice alone, even there, is going to say, ummati, ummati, my ummah, my ummah. And that's the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam uniquely. It's a day that's going to be hot. People are going to be sweating a lot, the narrations say. There's going to be no shade except the shade of Allah's throne. And the Prophet is going to have the ability to give water from this fountain to people to drink from. People will say this is a benefit that's reserved for people of Iman, people of faith. But you also have opinions that say that our messenger was sent as a messenger to all of mankind. And it might not be the most mainstream perspective, but there are those that legitimize the perspective that say that there's no qualification to his mercy. He's going to give that water to anybody he can. He's going to seek to intercede on behalf of anyone that he can, right? And so you can extrapolate from this also opportunity to reflect. What does Jannah mean to me? What is the day of judgment to me? In this short chapter, there's so many different concepts that go into ethics, values, self-awareness, self-perspective, paradise, theology, understanding who God is and how God relates to you. And we've only gotten through the first 3 words of it. You're saying it like 50 times in a week because every salah is Surah Al-Kawthar and Surah Ikhlas again and again and again. And it's all you really need at the end of the day to get you through it, to give you energy. Your boss talks to you poorly, God's got my back. Family doesn't treat you well, Allah is there for me. You get what I'm saying? Inna a'tainaka al-kawthar. One of the other frames we want to look at this is through the chapter that comes before it. Does anybody know what chapter comes before this? Surah Al-Ma'un, right? And so, Surah Al-Ma'un is going to give us 4 characteristics of people who are essentially hypocritical. That this chapter comes after Surah Ma'un and is giving us responses to that. So what are the first couple of things that Surah Ma'un talks about when it's describing those who reject the deen? What is it saying? Yeah, so after that, what happens? Oh man, have you ever seen those movies where there's like kids who are bad students and then their mothers come and sit in class with them and the teacher's like, who's going to answer this question? He's like, my kid's going to answer the question. And the kid looks miserable because their parents sitting next to them the whole time. You're like, raise your hand and answer the question. But you gave all the way from Egypt. Yeah, and she's cheating on top of it. She's telling you the answers. In Surah Ma'un, the first couple of verses that talk descriptively, they're talking about people who don't give things well, right? أرأيت الذي يكذب بالدين فذلك الذي يدع اليتيم ولا يحض على طعام المسكين. Right? They're not treating the miskin well. They're not treating the yatim well. This is about your giving, your generosity. And it's now being juxtaposed. Those people who are abtar, they don't do these things. They're not charitable. They're not generous. They're not compassionate. They're not kind. We give a lot and we give in abundance. Fundamental principle when you're trying to break out of a moral relativism and understand goodness, not with ambiguity, but beyond ambiguity. Like we said last week, God is good. And so when you're trying to think out how to be good, you want to try to be like God in whatever capacity you can. So God is merciful, so be merciful, because being merciful is good, because God is good and he's merciful, so being merciful must be good. So if the previous verse says these people who signs that they reject faith is that they don't do right by those who are in need, well, Allah is saying that he gives a lot in abundance. Al-Kawthar is the source of kathir. So you want to try to do that and embody that. Give with generosity, and not just of your wealth, but give of your time, right? A smile is a charity. You understand? So inna a'tainaka al-kawthar, this is in response to it. And this is again like a Quranic principle that some would posit, that the chapters, they speak in kind of relation to each other. There's a connection that goes across from them, right? And so you're going to have Surah Ma'un have a connection to this. It's going to connect to the next chapter and the next chapter. And there's things that you can pull as a thread. Inna a'tainaka al-kawthar. Any other thoughts on this before we move on? So I want to now just not take a tangent, but talk about one of these people whose name is Al-As ibn Wa'il, who's one of the people who is mocking the Prophet for his sons dying, right? This guy, his son is named Amr ibn al-As, who ends up being a companion of the Prophet of God, but he grows up also in a way that prior to, he's one of the staunchest enemies of Islam. His socialization plays a role in how he sees things, to the extent that when he becomes Muslim, he converts to Islam. He says to the Prophet, I don't want anything that I've done wrong to be held against me, because he knows when he dies, he's one of the governors of the Muslim community. Why is this something that's important to understand? You can end up being a good person even if your dad's a jerk. You understand? And you have to be able to recognize that in the frame of that kind of positive psychology and self-awareness, that lineage in and of itself is not something, right? In the very first kind of creation narrative, Adam alayhi salam has two sons who are completely different from each other. Habil and Qabil, Cain and Abel, they're not the same. They're very different. So you can't take these kind of platitudinal understandings of religion and then seek to force yourself to become subservient to them. But you can also see that there's room to be a change in the way things kind of function. So this guy leaves from a place, right? When he's dying, he's in tears on his deathbed, Amr ibn al-As. And his son, Abdullah, is worried that my father is going to leave. The angels of death must be coming to him. And when he asks him what's going on, Amr ibn al-As in his bed, he says that there's three phases of my existence that I had in this world. That there was one state I was in where I hated the messenger of God. And I was of his staunchest enemies. He's part of the group that goes to Abyssinia to bring the people back who went there to live under the sanctuary of the Najashi, the Christian king of Abyssinia. When they were facing a lot of persecution in Mecca, he went to bring them back to make life hard for them again. He says to his son, that was my first state. He said, my second state was when I became Muslim. And had I left this world in that state, perhaps there would be hope for me. And he said the third state he was in was now he was a governor. He had responsibility. And he said, the tears are coming because I wonder how many people will stand in front of me on the day of judgment saying that I did not fulfill their rights. But see the mindset shift between how he sees the world and how his father saw the world. His father was mocking the prophet. Even if he wasn't the prophet, can you imagine what kind of human being takes joy in ridiculing somebody whose son dies? And there's a shift just in one generation. Do you get what I'm saying? And so you can go from a place that's terrible to better, but you can also go from a place that you can now build even more, right? You want to think about that. And this is a part of our tradition. The prophets of God, the prophet Ibrahim, the prophet Musa, the prophet Nuh, all of these people, they're making dua. And they're not making dua for those who are in their immediate. They're making dua for the generations that are going to come much later. You get what I mean? Okay. So now when we move to the second verse, it says, فَصَلِّ لِرَبِّكَ وَانْحَرْ. The word here, fa, people will translate as then or thereafter, right? This essentially is linking this verse to this verse. So we gave you an abundance of good. So because of that, salli li rabbika wanhar, right? Because we gave this to you, then pray to your Lord, your Rabb, and sacrifice, right? Do the nahar. The salli here is like the literal act of prayer, but it also embodies an idea of thankfulness, right? You talked about gratitude already. So the recognition of the bounty is not in and of itself the goal, right? You want to recognize the ni'mah, the blessing, but you also want to use it as a vehicle to understand and recognize al-mun'im, the giver of the blessing. And the mode through which we engage in this aspect of gratitude, Allah is telling us directly, you express appreciation through this means. So salli has the word salah in it, right? If you know the word salah, makes sense. Li rabbika, the word Rabb is not just Lord, right? And we've talked about this, we talked about Surah Fatiha, but the word Rabbi, it means so many things, right? It means Malik, that he's the leader, the kind of master, the owner. It means Sayyid, the one who's authoritative, right? It means Murabbi, the caretaker, the cultivator, the nurturer. It means Al-Qayyim, the one who keeps everything together, right? Mudabbir, it means the one who is the mender, the healer of all things, right? When we say Rabb, there's a tone of affection and care to it, right? In Surah Ma'un, after we move from those two characteristics that talk about an absence of generosity and giving, it then talks about prayer, right? فَوَيْلٌ لِلْمُصَلِّينَ, and let the wail be to the people who pray. It's not saying the people who don't pray. It says to the ones who pray, but it talks about their prayer in two different ways, right? It says they're like kind of lazy or delay their prayer. And it also talks about showing off in your prayer. And so here it's saying, فَصَلِّ لِرَبِّكَ, that when you pray, you're just praying for God. So you don't have to get up and recite the longest surah when you pray because you're trying to impress the people praying behind you. You get what I mean? You don't have to be in a place where you're like overtly exaggerating in that sense. When you pray to Allah. Allah looks for a reason to accept, not looks for a reason to push away, right? The idea is to recognize who it is you're doing it for. And in all different aspects of what you do. This becomes hard if you've never thought about who God is to you. And it's hard to get things out of Islam if it's not about Allah. To feel strength and power, and to feel courage and love, and to feel centered, can't be then that I'm doing things in pursuit of validation from those who seek to find reason to break me down. It's not going to come from foolish pride or arrogance, but when you salli, you do it for your Rabb. Does it make sense? And there's so many different things that you could do that are for other than that. And it's contrasting now to the previous chapter. One har is in reference to a specific slaughter that we talk about, the nahar, right? Which, to not undermine the act of this in and of itself, right? I went to the Rohingya refugee camps in Bangladesh a few days after Eid al-Adha in like 2018, I went, or 2017, the first time. I was there right after Eid when the border opened between Bangladesh and Myanmar, and 500,000 Rohingya refugees fleeing genocide came into these refugee camps. May Allah make things easy for them. And then every day there was thousands of people more. There's now 1 million people there. And I went 10 months later, which was right before Eid al-Adha. And I sat down with one of the refugees. There wasn't a refugee that I met who couldn't tell me they hadn't seen loved ones burned alive in front of their eyes. The stories that I could tell you of every name of every person I still remember who fled all kinds of atrocity, real disgusting nature that humans can embody. They're in these camps now for at least these 10 months that we had in between. And many of them, every meal for the 10 months in between my two trips, they'd eaten the same rice every time they ate something, again and again and again. 3 times a day, the same rice for 10 months. Can you imagine doing that? One of the ladies that I talked to, who she had fled soldiers in Myanmar for 20 days after she had witnessed her husband and one of her infant child killed in front of her, took her 2 remaining babies, walked through pathways littered by the corpses of her own countrymen as she was trying to find refuge, and then a corrupt official at the camps didn't give her entrance unless she gave him 800 taka, which is like $8. And she didn't have it because she was fleeing ethnic cleansing. And then the local townspeople put their money together to get her this thing that was supposed to be hers for free. When I asked her, like, is there something I could do for you? She said, I really wish that on this day of Eid, I can give my children just some meat to eat. She said, all we've been eating is rice. And so not as a tangent, but when the days come for Eid, you understand that the act of that ritual sacrifice is there to give people in need what it is that the meat's distribution is, right? Does that make sense? So don't not do it. Like, you should do it, right? It'll help a lot of people who otherwise don't have anything. If you've ever heard a verse in the Quran that says things like iqam as-salah wa atu zakah, and it pairs salah and zakah, that's what some of the mufassirin say is happening in this verse. It says to you, make salah and give in charity, right? Do for yourself and do for others. The greatest expressions of gratitude for what you've been given is to engage in these 2 things. You have moments built into your routine that you deepen now in your relationship, that ritual is not an ends, but a means to something. And it's recentering because you treat it with what it's meant to be. And if for no other reason, the one who gave you so many things, he's telling you this is the best way to express appreciation. So you pray your prayers, you pray them on time, you deepen in your relationship to them, and then you also give to others. Some people would say that this is in reference to standing in Arafah and then the day of Eid al-Adha. And there's so much that you can take from it, but like you just start to think expressions directly that are counter to the previous chapter of those that have hypocrisy. And I want to be rooted in a place where I start to like feel what this religion can really offer to me. فَصَلِّ لِرَبِّكَ وَانْحَرْ إِنَّ شَانِيَكَ هُوَ الْأَبْتَرُ. That indeed it's your haters, right? Like there's a lot of different ways in Arabic to talk about people who are your enemies, right? We know the word udwan, for example, you know, like shaitan is called your adu, right? If you know Surah Al-Adiyat, right? The horses are called Adiyat because they're like pushing themselves to the limits. You know, they're like running so fast. They're like going against their limits. That's what an udwan is, a transgressor, right? They're pushing against the boundaries. They're transgressing boundaries. It's like the lowest level of an adversary. One of the highest levels is this. These are people who had deep hate and they acted upon their hate and did not engage in a way where they were holding it back. And so Allah is saying, those people, the ones who do that to you, they're the ones that are cut off. They're the ones who are going to have loss. Because the proportionality of this world in relation to the world that comes beyond this one is what has to be remembered and recognized. So all of those things, they're going to be carried forward, right? The way you treat people, how you talk, how you choose to not talk. Ours is not a religion that is just about, I don't do wrong. It's about also go out and do right. You do what's best. You do what's ethical. You engage in a practice of being a source of benefit for others. You definitely don't ever want to be somebody's hater. Can you imagine if that's a title you stand in front of God with? Somebody is going to have to come to this place. And this is crazy, right? In the sense of it's not something that is temporary, but in the Quran, when you have something that's now framed as a noun grammatically, it's something that's seen as just like a defining characteristic. You get what I mean? It's like perpetual. And so they think based off of their limited capacity that they're the ones who have a lot, right? And you think about this sometimes, like people's audacity in the ways that they feel like they are allowed to talk to you. The kind of things that they say to you that are so ridiculous. You're like, what is it that you even think of yourself, let alone how you see me, that you think it's okay for you to talk to me like this, to ask me the questions you ask, or speak to me in the ways that you speak to me, or discuss me. Forget about even talking to me, but discussing me as if I'm something that's part of your rhetoric, right? Like people intellectualize people's struggles so much. It's crazy. You don't ever want to do that. You get to a place where you validate somebody's being mistreated or being held down, or you relish in like somebody's like demise. You're in a place where you find a sense of kind of elevation by somebody else being hurt in a kind of miserable way. You know what I mean? That's crazy. And you can see historically these kinds of things happening across the board, right? What does it look like if you've ever seen or consumed an image of somebody who decades ago, not centuries ago, was part of a lynching in this country? In India right now, they are at a point where they're starting to beat people to death or near death. Before it was they were eating beef or they were eating meat. Just a few days ago, there's a man who they suspected he might be Muslim. and they did this to him. There's capacity that's there, that's perpetrating, but also those that are putting out the ideologies, the thought, the philosophies, and then they feel good about it at the end of it. That's crazy. There's people who they smile when they hear a Palestinian journalist gets killed by a sniper. There's people who can make jokes about children being locked in cages at our borders. People who can create entire routines of humor at the expense of entire racial demographics. You get what I'm saying, right? You don't want to be in this because these people, they are this. They are abtar. They're going to be cut off. What they're cut off from is blessing. They're cut off from barakah. They're cut off from anything of benefit that comes in the world after this one. You get what I mean? Any thoughts, any reflections before we kind of wrap up? Pause. Yeah.
Yeah, for the first time, I realized that it's Fasalli Rabbika and not Fasalli Lillah. And when it's Rabbika, it has a sense of closeness and affection. It's just Fasalli Lillah. In this moment of sorrow and sadness, the word Rabbika is so emotional.
Alhamdulillah. Allah loves you, so you build up that love and you remove the obstacles that come in the way. So I want us to do just for a quick 5 minutes again. What are some of our takeaways? Anybody? What do you guys talk about?
One of the things we, like as these 5% picked up on, was when you said it's not enough to not do wrong, you also have to actively do right. And sometimes you just think that just by not doing wrong, you're doing great. But now I'm starting to realize there's a more active component to it than just being passive and like avoiding wrong things.
Yeah, there's like so many terrible people, right? And the counter to that is to really like live your faith. You don't want to be hesitant in it. You don't need anybody's permission to do good things. And so you think about it not on scales of grandeur, but just day to day, what are the things you could do? How many people do you pass by on a daily basis that nobody even acknowledges their existence? The person who serves you food, gave you a cup of coffee, the bus driver, the Uber driver, whoever it is, that also has like a name, a narrative. They are existing right now as we speak. Do you know what I mean? Somebody is going to literally, when we leave, vacuum this carpet, and you will pray on it and sit on it and do whatever it is that you do. And you might not ever even think that somebody came in here and did that. And so goodness is not that I'm going to go and construct this massive building for people to pray in. I'm going to go by my hand and dig a well. Goodness is sometimes just recognizing. Gratitude is not always so hard. Sometimes it's simple. Be like, man, somebody vacuumed this and I get to pray in a clean spot. And it might not be the person that vacuumed it, but when I walk down the hall and there's a guy pushing like a garbage can with a broom attached, I'm just going to say thank you to him. Or the security guard downstairs who's waiting down there and is watching the door. I'm going to take the time to learn his name and to just ask how he's doing. Does he need anything? Maybe I'll bring in something to eat next time. Anything. Do you know what I mean? Right? Doing good. You want to, like, Allah is the one that gave you creativity in the first place. Allah is the one that gave you your imagination. Don't get stifled, right? Like, be in a place where you're bold. Somebody's bold enough to say like dumb things to people. You be bold enough to like live your beauty. Do you know what I mean? Right? And you do it every day as best as you can. Does that make sense? The benefactor is going to be the recipient. It's also going to like build up your heart, right? You're going to start to feel like a different strength, you know? What else? What else do we talk about? Yeah.
I'm completely cheating. But it's just a comment about when you mentioned the story of the not just being sacrificed, but also opportunity to give. It's really beautiful to see it in contrast of Upton, where like people who aren't able to give, where it says like they say that you aren't able to give, but your ability to like worship God, your ability to benefit other people is in itself proof of like the fact that you are able.
Yeah. Can you think about like how much would it suck if you actually had not like the monetary incapacity, but you had means and you still didn't give to people? Why would anybody want to be like that? Like, why would you want to be greedy or to hoard wealth or to be somebody who is like oppressive? Do you get what I'm saying? And sometimes when you think about punishment, right, in the sense of like religious punishment or whatever, like what kind of prison must you be suffocated in that's how you see the world? You get what I'm saying? And that's not across the board, right? Like some of us don't have, some of us do. Wealth in and of itself is not a problem. What our tradition teaches us is not money is the issue. What your question about is how did you earn it and what did you spend it on? You see? But just thinking about what I'm taking away from what you're saying, right? Why would you want to be somebody who lies? Like, why? Why would you want to be somebody who speaks poorly of others? And when you think about being cut off, the issue in and of itself is the fact that you're doing it is already like the punishment. Do you get what I mean? Like you're living devoid of certain things. May Allah never make us people like that. But you have opportunity, like you jump on the vehicle, you do good, because the increase of a virtue necessitates using the virtue as the vehicle for the increase. So you want to be more generous, then the way to increase in generosity is by being generous. Just like patience is the means to increase in patience and compassion and kindness. You know what I'm saying? Other thoughts? Yeah.
Like for example, in Eid al-Adha, some Muslims would prefer to go to the beach, day of Eid, enjoy themselves, and they don't really believe that they should do this act of nahr because they say it's sunnah, it's not farida. And sometimes I really pity them because they don't know the joy and the happiness when you do this nahr, when you give out, and part of it you cook and you share with others. They don't see this, and they don't see that they're missing a lot. So it's this comparison between nahr and not being able to give. So,
yeah, exactly. And the fulfillment of it, if you have the means and capacity to actually go and perform yourself, you do it. If you can't do that, you can give money for it to be done for you, right? And you can do that as well. And it doesn't cost a lot. You know, like there's some parts of the world where you can do this and it ends up being like fairly inexpensive to do, but it goes a long way because the dollar is still in some parts of the world is in a place where it carries over more in other parts of the world. Do you know what I mean? And you want to do it. And, you know, we had a sister in our community who had just converted to Islam. She was super excited for Eid al-Adha. I'm going to like celebrate this holiday. It's my first holiday as a Muslim. I'm going to do what Muslims do. She was like amped. And then she came to my office a week later, she's literally in tears. I was like, what's wrong? She's like, I looked up how we celebrate Eid and it said I got to like kill a goat. He said, I don't even know where I'm supposed to buy a goat. Am I supposed to take this to my apartment and kill it there? And she's freaking. I was like, hold on, don't kill anything in your house. That's not what you're supposed to do. That's like not what it is, right? But, it's a practice that's not meant to be kind of self-serving. Nothing nafsi is a key to Jannah, because you want to think deeper sometimes. And so many of our traditions are also rooted in social cohesion and social equity and recognizing like experience across. You had your hand raised. Donica.
Yeah, just when you mentioned about the security guard, it made me think like, all the stuff that's been happening lately. In like 2018, I remember I was on 59th Street and going upstairs, and like all these people were just the way we go, and we all saw like a big flash, and I remember just like running downstairs on an escalator that's supposed to be going up, and then somebody came. I said, "What happened?" They said, "It was just a train. It was just a train." And I didn't eat the entire day. I had to like so much adrenaline, and when I got home, I was so dizzy. And then what happened? Like around in Ramadan, I was alhamdulillah, I was home that day. I was working on that day. I was home, but I do take the end. And that could have even me, and I guess because I was working at home, I had a lot going on at that time. I didn't even like really have a chance to reflect on what a blessing it was that I wasn't out. But like but I actually thought like maybe I wasn't so traumatized by it because I already went through it in a sense. And I remember hearing something that somebody had said that people will go through trauma because they're in trauma because they think they're in trauma. And that's why I thought that first incident was. But then it's like the second incident just happened this past weekend. And somebody was just killed. And it just makes me think like, that we have, advocacy and, all these things that we can basically ask Allah to protect us. And there's 70,000 angels, not in numbers, but just so many that are protecting us every single day. And that's a blessing. They get just going through the motions of every day, going to work, going home. But really, it's a miracle that we get to work and we get home and we get to see our families.
Yeah, alhamdulillah. So what you want to do is just spend some time with this chapter. I think we actually have to start heading out because the building is closing. But spend some time, reflect on it, think about it, allow for yourself to engage it, right? Short chapter, small number of words, but deep meaning to it. Memorize it if you haven't, and then just spend some time reflecting on it in yourself, right? Some of these things aren't absolutes, that you can still draw for yourself perspective and understanding. If anybody needs anything, our staff is still here for the summer. You can reach out to us. We're happy to meet with you, get together. If anybody needs anything, inshallah, please let us know.
If you would like to listen to more, please donate to www.icnyu.org/donate. For more of our virtual programs, go to www.icnyu.org/classes. If you have any questions, email us at info@icnyu.org.